If it's Wednesday, the Justice Department alleges that Trump's team likely hid and removed government records, all to obstruct its investigation into highly classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. We'll have the latest legal fallout for the former president and his team. Plus, a primetime address. President Biden hits the road to speak again about what he calls the soul of the nation as he ramps up his criticisms of the former president and his MAGA followers ahead of November. And later, international nuclear inspectors have finally made it to Ukraine to help avoid a potential catastrophe at Europe's largest nuclear plant as the area faces a fresh wave of attacks. Well, good afternoon and welcome to Meet the Press Now. I'm Chuck Todd. In the last 24 hours, Donald Trump's legal troubles have gone from bad to worse as the Justice Department outlined what it found at Mar-a-Lago, as well as efforts by the former president and his lawyers to prevent federal agents from getting those documents. In a filing just before midnight last night, the Justice Department stated that it seized more than 100 classified documents from Mar-a-Lago earlier this month, August 8th, and that some of those documents were so sensitive and classified that the FBI agents and justice attorneys that were there, they actually had to go get additional security clearances simply to review them and then remove them. The filing also stated that Mr. Trump and his team likely concealed and removed documents before the FBI search. And in an effort to bolster its claims, the Justice Department also included this photo of what appears to be various classified documents it says were recovered from a container in Donald Trump's office. This photo, I think, has been seen by every American with a phone at this point. The filing was in response to Trump's criticisms of the FBI's search and a request for a special master to oversee everything obtained from Mar-a-Lago, a move the Justice Department says is now unnecessary because, well, their teams have already completed their review of those documents. Trump's legal team took a long time to make that request. But Trump's team still does have until the end of today to respond to the latest filing, and a judge has scheduled a hearing for tomorrow to discuss the matter, where they could still appoint a special master, which could slow things down a bit, but really not do much. Former president, meanwhile, is criticizing what he calls a photo op of documents marked classified, as his allies attempt to discredit the Justice Department and its investigation. Let's be clear here. The investigation appears to be in its early stages, and what we still don't know what exactly FBI agents found at Mar-a-Lago. But the evidence they appear to have gathered points right now in one direction, towards an indictment, pure and simple. As NBC News legal analyst Andrew Weissman, a former federal prosecutor himself, who was part of the Mueller team, said after reading last night's filing, big picture, you don't make a filing this strong, bold, and factually accusatory if you don't have every intention to indict. Question maybe is, what are they waiting for? I'm joined now by Ken Delaney, and he's, of course, our Justice Intelligence correspondent here at NBC News. Mark Caputo's our senior national political reporter, as his ears and eyes in Trump world. Two of our NBC News legal analysts are also here, defense attorney Danny Ceballos and former federal prosecutor Carol Lamb. Ken, let me get started with you here, and it's to get at Andrew Weissman's point, this strong filing. I want to start with one of the first excerpts from their filing, which it felt like almost a troll of Trump. The FBI, in a matter of hours, recovered twice as many documents with classification markings as the, quote, diligent search, unquote, that the former president's counsel and other representatives had weeks to perform, calls into serious question the representations made in the June 3rd certification and casts doubt on the extent of cooperation in this matter. And let me add, if the control room can put up page 9, because page 9 to me is also important here, because in that part of this, and I hope I have this correctly here, it says that essentially law enforcement, here it is, the former president's counsel explicitly prohibited government personnel from opening or looking inside any of the boxes that had remained in the storage room, giving no opportunity for the government to confirm that no documents with classification markings remain. Now, I want to get everybody's timeline straight here. That was when it was a voluntary exercise. And then the search warrant said, we gathered all this up basically in no time. That seemed to be a real, they basically are informing the Trump folks, you've already committed a crime.
How many times in Washington, Chuck, will we say it's not the crime, it's the cover-up? I mean, that's the message of this filing, that if they had just given the documents back when they were first asked, or even pursuant to a grand jury subpoena, none of this might have happened. They are now accusing the Justice Department, as the Trump team, essentially of obstruction of justice. They're saying they found evidence of obstruction, that they were lied to. And as the federal prosecutors on our panel can tell us, when the government is lied to, that becomes almost more important to the investigators than the underlying crime. They smell blood, and they move to file charges. We've seen in many cases. We don't know if it's going to happen here, but the idea that they were assured in writing by the custodian of records, which we assume is one of the Trump lawyers, that all the documents had been turned over, and yet they still wouldn't let this senior Justice Department official look in the boxes in the storage room. Right. And then the FBI goes in and finds twice as many documents, as classified documents, as were turned over pursuant to the grand jury subpoena. That is just, first of all, it's inexplicable on the side of the Trump team why anybody would allow that to happen. But it means that this is much more serious than we had first understood.
So, Carol Lamb, here's a simple question that I've asked my own team all day today, and I think others are asking, which is, do they already have enough to indict, and why wait?
It's interesting to listen to the reporting that's going on about this, because for former prosecutors or current prosecutors, it's like watching an investigation being looked at backwards or inside out. The question, why don't they indict right now? What are they waiting for? Well, first we have to establish, if they were going to indict somebody, who are they going to indict? The former president is very good at insulating himself from what appears to be decisions that are made by his team. And so if I were running this investigation, and they know a lot that I don't know, but when you do this kind of investigation, you get the documents first, and then you go to testimony. Then you confront witnesses with the documents, and you ask them questions about it. I believe they're at that stage now, and there's a long ways to go. Because remember, in a white-collar kind of case, or in any criminal case, you have to consider not only what your proof of the crime is, but you have to be able to bat away any potential defenses. So if I were in their shoes now, I would be taking that custodian of records who said, we've done a diligent search, and based on what I know, we've turned over everything. Well, it turns out they only turned over 1/3 of the required documents. And then I would say, who told you that a diligent search had been conducted? And you work your way up from there. So that's why you're not seeing an indictment right now, because you have to cover every single base before you bring an indictment.
All right, Carol. So that means the next step, are we to expect subpoenas before a grand jury?
That's what I would expect is going on. But when you say, are we to expect, we are presumably not going to see that. That's going to be between the witness and the witness's counsel. Right.
I say this because the Trump team has a way of letting us know sometimes things that happen. I mean, Ken, are we back to watching the door to see who goes in and out of a grand jury here in D.C. these days?
Absolutely. And I think there are a lot of witnesses in this case whose identities are unknown to us, who may be down in Florida. And so we may not see the full picture.
Could they be doing this in other spots?
Absolutely.
Almost to protect themselves a little bit.
100%.
Danny Ceballos, I was trying to keep track of the number of lawyers that in defense of Donald Trump have put their law license essentially in jeopardy. Is that happened again?
I think that's pretty clear, at least from the government's viewpoint in their filing. The government clearly seems to believe that the lawyers who certified that all the documents were turned over are going to have some problems. And that leaves me nonplussed, because lawyers risk their license when they certify something. So we learn over time, you can't just take what the client tells you at face value. You've got to do a little digging before you sign a certification that is based on what the client has told you. I'm going to let you in on a little secret. Sometimes clients aren't forthcoming when it comes to the truth. Yeah? Sometimes they tell lawyers the version of the world that as they see it, or as they would like it to be. And if that's what happened here, if they certified something that they knew wasn't exactly right, or they didn't know when they certified it, that could be really problematic for them. And it is not that difficult to get your ticket pulled or lose your law license if you start certifying things that were not true and you didn't do a proper investigation.
Hey, look, it's one thing you wonder if the guy will ever pay. Now you have to wonder if you're going to be able to legally have a client after you're done representing Mr. Trump. Danny, let me ask you about the request for a special master. Is this an incompetency move here that they waited so long?
It's a strange move all around. Sure, it's strange that they waited so long, but what is the benefit to having a special master? That's a neutral third party who's presumably going to go through the documents and not automatically side with Trump, because the government isn't going to agree to some special master that's some higher up or muckety-muck in the Republican Party.
Right.
So they may lose just as much with a special master. And by the way, having waited this long, the documents have already been reviewed. Yeah, sure, the government says, oh, we had a filter team look at them, but do you know who's on that filter team? Other members of the government.
Right.
So look, the government's reviewed all the documents. I actually was surprised that the government even bothered to oppose the special master, and in addition, ask for additional pages to do so. But they answered my questions in this filing. They were using this as an opportunity to set the factual record straight and add to it, lest you think these documents were not dangerous to national security. They were.
Mark Caputo, a little bit of the sort of fallout spin aspect of this from Team Trump. As usual, I assume it's the former president that is, quote, running all of the PR and all of the legal here, and that's why it's so chaotic?
Yeah, one of the things we saw with the January 6th investigation is President Trump, former President Trump, has a tendency to set up multiple silos of parallel information to reach him. So one group of advisors doesn't know what the other group of advisors is doing. So that advantages him in certain ways. In this case, it might have disadvantaged him. We've got some preliminary reporting that some people had told him, hey, you need to fight the feds on this. You shouldn't give them the documents. Now, that also might be an after the fact and invention by anonymous sources with their own agendas. The problem with Trump world is it's just not clear. We do know now he has hired a new lawyer, Chris Kise, the former Florida Solicitor General. He has a reputation as being a real professional in multiple silos, multiple areas of the law, from federal to state, appellate to criminal. He's not really a federal criminal defense lawyer, but considering the conversation we just had, there's at least two lawyers from Trump world who might no longer be lawyers.
There was a part of me, Mark, there was a part of me that wondered, do we need to check back in with Mr. Kise about whether he still took this gig after seeing the filing?
Well, I wrote the story yesterday because he had signed the document. So he's in for a penny, in for a pound. How many pounds and how many pennies, I'm not quite sure.
All right, Ken, I think the other interesting thing here is very early on, Merrick Garland, when a lot of folks, and including myself, like, hey, you do need to be more transparent, more forthcoming. He said something at the very beginning, and it came true in this filing. We're gonna speak basically for the rest of this investigation like we normally do through our filings. Yeah. It goes back to what Danny said. They seem to go out of their way to want to get this out there, correct?
Oh, absolutely. And the Trump team let him do it. The Trump team paved the way for this to happen, and they took every advantage of him. Legal analysts who are looking at this filing say it's one of the most incisive, powerful pleadings they've seen in a long time. Clearly, some of the best minds at the Justice Department were put to work on this thing. It's clear. It introduces new facts. The picture, as you said, was designed to go viral, and it has gone viral. I mean, it was a powerful recitation. Now, but let's think about what's not in here. No hint that any of these classified documents were shared with an adversary or found their way out of Mar-a-Lago. That's important because we're all asking ourselves the question of why. Why did this happen? Why did he bring these documents to Mar-a-Lago? And then why did he resist? Why were these lies told? And is it just a matter that Donald Trump thought that he didn't have to turn these documents over to the archives and he was just being stubborn? Or was there something else at work there?
Carol, who's going to, I mean, you made it very clear that one of the reasons why they may not, the question is, who do you indict? Is it Mark Meadows as White House Chief of Staff who actually has the most exposure here if the former president chooses to decide that?
I think that what Ken was saying is very true. This has turned into more of an obstruction of justice case than the original removal of the documents. And we still don't know what's in those documents, but it's very clear from the allegations and the statutes that are cited in the search warrant itself that the Department of Justice is primarily concerned about the cat and mouse game that has gone on for the past 15 months or so with respect to these documents. So Mark Meadows may be a little bit removed from that, right? It's very hard to say. The specifics of who made that certification and on what basis they made that certification, it might stop short of the former president, or it might go all the way up to the former president. There's a lot of information in the original affidavit that was redacted about who gave them information and what information they gave them. So really all we have now is we have the fact of the documents, but we don't have the pieces sewn together in a way that only testimony can do. So that's why, unfortunately, we have to be patient still.
Right. You know, Danny, Carol brings up something else, and I'm curious, this is going to put the lawyer in an odd, the person that could end up, who told you to certify this, I mean, do you expect that lawyer to be brought before a grand jury?
Brought before a grand jury as a witness, I think we can safely expect that. But prosecuted, I'm not so sure, because it goes to what Judge Lamb is talking about. Who actually took the documents and who was responsible for not giving them back? Certainly, in a way, this is a figurative indictment that the government filed last night, but it doesn't tell us who exactly had responsibility for either putting these documents in a box or repeatedly not giving them back to the government, except for those lawyers who supposedly certified and said that, oh, no, we've given everything back. That's where you see the government possibly focusing in. But even if they did call those folks before a grand jury, they're not going to get very much out of them because their attorneys are going to tell them, you're not testifying. This is Fifth Amendment time.
And Mark Caputo, we know the former president is venting on his own social media site. Are they... I got to think that they've noticed that there's a lot of silence suddenly with Republicans rallying around them, that they don't have the same energy that was there 3 weeks ago, that there is suddenly stories about candidates scrubbing their website of Trump references. How's that impacting Team Trump?
Team Trump, good question. Someone I spoke to President Trump over the weekend and told me he was shocked that the former president seemed detached from reality because all he was doing was talking about his poll numbers, his fundraising, and how his standing is still high and improving in a potential Republican primary campaign for president against Ron DeSantis. Now, President Trump speaks to multiple people and says multiple things, sometimes contradictory. So far, the through line we're hearing from everyone is that Donald Trump is positive about this, which, of course, puzzles the rest of the world because you have your house searched by the FBI and they're basically accusing you or your designees of obstruction of justice, most people are going to be pretty freaked out. Apparently, Donald Trump isn't.
I had a Republican strategist say to me, he goes, I wish I could be as comfortable standing on a cliff as much as Donald Trump seems to enjoy standing on a cliff. He goes, but he lives there, which may be why it doesn't make him so nervous. It was an interesting metaphor, Mark.
Yeah. It's like a hurricane. He's literally the calm at the center of the storm he creates.
Yeah, it's a nice way to put it. Very quickly, Ken, it could be now weeks before we hear again about this case, officially.
Or months if the DOJ decides to apply their pre-election policy, and that's up in the air. Donald Trump's not on the ballot.
No, he's not. Fascinating. All right, Ken, Mark, Danny, and Carol, thank you all. Coming up, the current president looks to flip the midterm script from Law and Order as the former president attacks the FBI and DOJ's criminal investigation into classified documents at his Florida home. Will that messaging matter? We'll discuss that. Plus, Mississippi's water crisis amid the flooding aftermath. President Biden has to approve a second state of emergency as thousands of residents go without usable drinking water. We'll have the latest from Jackson, a city that has had these water problems for years. And we waited for another catastrophe, apparently, before we did anything about it. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. In the immediate aftermath of the FBI search on Donald Trump's Mar-a-Lago home, Republicans of all stripes largely rushed to the former president's defense, claiming he was a victim of some form of political persecution. But in the hours since the Justice Department's filing last night, it contained photographic evidence of this sensitive information that was in Trump's possession after his lawyers said they'd given it all back. Those defenses have been fewer and far between, and only from the biggest Trump diehards. For example, the Twitter account run by the Republicans on the House Judiciary Committee took issue with the fact that the FBI spread the documents on the floor and inaccurately claimed the Justice Department did nothing for 18 months. That's, of course, Jim Jordan territory. Now, Trump ally and South Dakota Governor Kristi Noem, meanwhile, tried to sow doubts about the material. that might be in all those folders marked classified. Take a listen at this attempt at spin.
I guess the question to all of you is what was in those documents and folders? Do you know?
No,
Top secrets.
And we deserve to know
what they say.
And I don't know if the DOJ and FBI can be trusted to tell us what was in there. That's the thing. You can see folders, you can see big words on the. Do we know that that is really what President Trump brought to his home? Do we know that he put them there? Do we know what's inside?
I believe she was a 3-term member of Congress before she was governor of South Dakota. Joining me now is Eugene Scott, national political reporter for The Washington Post, Stephanie Schriock, Democratic strategist, senior advisor for the Strategic Victory Fund, and Republican strategist Doug Heye. Doug, let me start with you.
I figured you might.
I know, sorry about that. But it is, I mean, my guess is, I'm going to guess Governor Noem wished she didn't have her Fox and Friends appearance today, and wondering, why am I getting asked about this by that crowd on that front? But, you know, she's about the only person defending Trump today because she happened to be on air.
You know, when I started on Capitol Hill, there was this publication called The Hotline, and it would get faxed to us every day. And in those days, it was impossible to get your member of Congress on TV. It was nearly impossible unless you had done something really, really bad. Now, every day, members of Congress of either party, you get elected, you get on TV. And so what that's meant is that they've all been in the Donald Trump defending business for a long time. Fortunately for some of them, it's August, so they're off or they're on vacations or CODELs. But here's the problem that Republicans have, and they've had for 5 years. Anytime you stick your neck out for Donald Trump on day one, you know by day 5 or week 3 or whatever it is, the news always gets worse. So don't stick your neck out for Donald Trump. Be quiet if you need to. Go on vacation, because this is where you defend him on day one. You have to walk away slowly sooner or later.
Eugene, I was thinking about this when I asked that question about the lawyer, and you're like, my goodness, how many lawyers has he had that are going to be disbarred because of actions they took on his account, right? Or lose their law. I mean, we're up to 4 or 5, maybe 6, you know, at some point on here. Never mind, you're wondering if you're going to get paid, right? Which is always another aspect of him. It does make me wonder how long so many Republicans have stuck by him, because again, it's one-way street with the loyalty. He's not going to stick by other people. Ask Dr. Oz.
Yeah, I mean, from covering midterms and just elections before now, we know that one of the main reasons so many Republicans continue to stick by Trump is because the base continues to stick by Trump. And so as long as Republican voters are going to punish conservative lawmakers who criticize Trump or who step back or who ask questions, they're going to be loyal because they want to remain in office. They have higher ambitions, as we know the South Dakota governor does. And they know that's what they have to do if they're going to be successful.
All right, Stephanie, the question, though, is it does seem as if now the national Democrats have said, you know what, let's go all in on MAGA Republicans. Is there any risk to the over-Trumpifying these midterms?
Well, not that Trump is in the news every day again.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like 2018 all over again. I mean, if it was 6 months ago, you know, that decision, that was a risk decision.
Let's take Terry
right?
McAuliffe.
It really was.
Terry McAuliffe, right? The right in the Virginia governor's race.
Sure.
Now, I would argue where it needed to work, it did. It just didn't work in the rest of the state.
Right, but a lot of other factors were going on.
That's right.
And Trump wasn't in the news every single day a year ago.
Yeah, it might
I mean,
be
the environment's completely different. And we're now looking at what I believe will be a very high turnout midterm, which we both know is completely unusual.
Right.
This should be a high Republican turnout and a mid-sized Democrat. Well, that's not the case. Trump's driving turnout. Abortion rights is driving turnout, and just this growing energy. And I think we're in a new era of high turnout for a while here, because we're so partisan and so driven right now.
You know, apathy is for countries that don't have democracy issues. You know, I mean, you know, that's the sad downside of it. Seems like it took a crisis to get everybody to go, oh, maybe I need to vote.
Right.
Unfortunately.
Doug, all of this is, we talk about whether the Trump defenders, if we were in the heart of primary season, do you think this silence would have stuck?
No, if you're running and you're running to get that core Trump base,
you were going to have to, now that the primaries are, that's what I wonder.
Yeah.
Primaries being over is probably also making it easier for Republicans to sidle away from it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I love that they tried, though, when, in fact, we also live in an era where everything is already out there. and can be pulled back, and it's going to be on 30-second ads, and it's going to be on digital ads, and they can't walk away from what they've said.
Yeah, whether it's Trump or scrubbing abortion language or...
That does seem naive in this day and age to think you can scrub a website.
Welcome to a first-time candidate.
Correct.
You know, this is what happens.
That's a really good point.
But ultimately, if you're one of these Republican candidates, you have two issues in front of you that you should talk about all day, every day. It's inflation and crime. And if you look at what Republican voters are motivated by and independent voters, that's issue number one and issue number two. You don't have to defend Donald Trump. Go after Joe Biden and all those things that have 70% of the country that think that the country's moving in the wrong direction, and you'll be on terra firma. As long as you're defending these other things, whether they're your mistakes or Trump's, you're on quicksand.
But what's interesting about some of that is, yes, that's often polls at the top, but it's not a 50% issue anymore.
Right.
It's inflation and gas prices in particular, as they're falling, that dynamic's changing. Abortion rights is going up. Every poll I see, it's a little bit higher as people are understanding what exactly is going on in the states. So it is a really interesting issue dynamic in this election, unlike usual, where it's economy usually way high up and a bunch of other stuff. They're all kind of bunched together now, and that's going to be very
I'd also say, having survived Todd Akin and Richard Murdoch, Republicans talk about this issue less, just in general. It helps yourself.
You know, it's interesting, Eugene, the issue matrix that Stephanie's talking about. What I found interesting in our polling is that when you took election interest and the number one issue, it turned out your base Republicans, it was abortion, the border and immigration. Your base Democrats, it was democracy. And in the middle, and abortion was also motivator on the left. In the middle, with the swing voters, was cost of living. It really did feel as if the economy, that at the end of the day, if like inflation ticks up in October, bad news for Democrats, good news for Republicans. If gas goes under 350 around the country, then all of a sudden, watch out, right? Because they're the voter that's both a little upset about abortion, a little upset about Trump, and a little upset about the cost of living.
And that's not really surprising, considering that inflation is affecting everyone. And that's why Democrats and Joe Biden are going to have to be very effective and proactive in communicating what they have done so far to change these things. Because, as Doug mentioned, Republicans who are strategic are going to zoom in on saying this is a problem that you said you're worried about and that it's not improving. They're going to need some counter messaging coming from Democrats.
The Joe Biden Soul of the Nation speech, is that a 2022 speech or a 2024 speech?
I think it's certainly a right now speech. I mean, he's certainly focused on the midterms and trying to make sure that, Trump continues to show his face so he can Trumpify. And we think about Soul of the Nation and Biden, and you think about 2020, he came out trying to make the argument that the soul of the nation was something that was, unsettled and at risk of just falling apart due to the former president. And I think this speech will communicate that he thinks that's something that could happen if Democrats don't remain in power.
Yeah, I don't even think of it as 22 or 24. This is actually a speech that a president needs to give right now, because the crisis that is facing our democracy with these extremist voices out of the MAGA Republicans is a crisis and needs to be talked about in a real way. And I think, because you did just bring up, folks do care about democracy.
Yeah.
And
it's
exactly right. And we need to have a very serious conversation about the direction of this country.
Doug, I just look at what the average voter is going to see over the next 72 hours. You're going to have Joe Biden making his speech. Then you're going to have Donald Trump campaigning in Pennsylvania. Doing what Donald Trump does, probably not talking about the voters of Pennsylvania, probably talking about himself. I mean, how do you, as a Dr. Oz, who's got to win swing voters, there's no way he wins without some Republican suburban swing vote. How does he navigate this?
These are the toughest waters at all. And what we see from campaigns now is, we're in August, but it's post-Labor Day for these campaigns. You've had schools going back to school already. Parents they're no longer on vacation with their kids. We're past Labor Day. And so if you're Dr. Oz and it's real, you've got to find these issues where you can really articulate this to voters. And Biden's not going to help that. Trump's not going to help that. Again, I'd say focus on the economy, focus on inflation.
But he's going to be standing next to Mastriano and Trump.
Right. There's your problem. Welcome to the Republican Party in 2022.
Yep.
I mean, I just see there, and you're just like, and I guess the question I have, Eugene, is at what point, we've been through these cycles where, my God, Trump is killing the party. How come people don't break away? And it's all because they look at the base number and they fear. We're at one of those points again. I assume this silence will actually break at some point, because there's going to be, we saw it in 2016, you see it there's going to be a Lindsey Graham or somebody saying, you know, you need his voters.
You're going to have to. I mean, that's why Dr. Oz is going to be standing right beside them, because as much as they try to move this conversation forward about what the Republican Party is and what America is focused on, Donald Trump is at the center of it, and it's very much driving its focus. It's Trump that's Trumpifying the midterms.
Yeah. No, Democrats didn't do it.
Nope.
It is sort of in that sense.
Yes.
You're like, Donald Trump just showed up at the dinner party and refuses to leave. Doug,
It's been a long dinner. A long dinner.
People, it's never going to end.
It's never
Good luck
ending.
with that, Doug. I think they wanted to uninvite you, and they keep inviting you. Anyway, up next, dire conditions. Mississippi flooding is leaving more than 150,000 residents without drinkable water. We're going to have an update on the recovery efforts. We're going to be live in Mississippi. But you need to realize, we've known about this problem for years in Jackson. That's what makes this story so frustrating. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Mississippi's largest city and the state capital is in a state of emergency after flooding from the Pearl River caused complications at Jackson's water treatment plant. And yesterday, President Biden approved Governor Tate Reeves' request for an emergency declaration for the state. Now, the crisis has left Jackson without a reliable water supply. Let me repeat that. The capital of the city, that is the capital of Mississippi, does not have a reliable water supply. Hard stop. The water that does come out of the taps is not safe, even before the flooding. The city had already been under a boil water notice for a month. Take a look at this video taken at Jackson Locksmith Company.
Took 10 minutes to fill this. Straight out of the faucet. And that's why we don't drink Jackson water.
It's only the latest example of Jackson's water system problems. Last April, we covered the water crisis on an episode of Meet the Press Reports. That was after a winter storm burst the pipes in the city.
Jackson Public Works Director Charles Williams told me 2 unexpected winter storms caused pipes to burst from freezing temperatures, leaving residents with no water at all. But with the city's aging system, it was only a matter of time.
We've got lines in the city that are over 100 years old. From an engineer, I always knew, right? But sometimes it's difficult for the public, the politicians, and everybody else to fully grasp what you've been trying to articulate for a number of years, that we really need to address this. When you look at other communities that are similar like Jackson, yes, we're all struggling. We're all trying to find available funding to put toward this infrastructure that it continues to age every year. You know, it doesn't get better, you know, it gets worse.
Where are the new pipes, everybody? The mayor of Jackson acknowledged the ongoing nature of the problem, saying yesterday that they've been in a constant state of emergency even before this latest crisis. So joining me now is my colleague, Guad Venegas. He's in Richland, Mississippi. And Guad, it's beyond frustrating. This is a systemic failure, federal, state, local, for the people of Jackson at this point. This was a known, we were a natural disaster away from a disaster, and here we are.
Chuck, the engineer who just spoke explained it right. He probably has a better understanding than we do. We originally came here because of the flooding. As we were reporting on the flooding, the mayor walked up and said, you know, we do have an issue with the water plant, and then this became a huge story. It's bad news, but the good news is that now you have the attention of the state government, the federal government. President Biden spoke to the mayor this morning. The EPA is involved, FEMA. The mayor just informed minutes ago, I should say, that the main water treatment plant right behind me, O.B. Curtis, this is the plant that distributes most of the water to Jackson, the plant that failed. They just installed a new pump. The mayor says that pump could be operational as of this evening, so that will help with some of the problems. But according to the information that we've received from the state, there's numerous other problems with the plant. They've had their experts in there. They say that they need more people to be working on the plant. They, of course, need to work on the infrastructure, and it's going to take a long time. Now, originally, as you mentioned, the issues here were affecting the people of Jackson. The quality of the water was bad. There was the boil notice for the people in Jackson already, and now it's not even about the quality, it's about the quantity, because a lot of people aren't getting the water. We went into the community, Chuck, to talk to some people and see what it's like. Take a listen to this mother of 3 who's been living in Jackson all summer with these problems.
It's hot, it's muggy, no water. It's been like that on and off actually throughout the whole summer.
How much are you spending on all this water?
Now on water, just for during the summer, we've spent about $900 on water.
Wow, so you're spending a little less than 100, maybe 100 a week, or?
Yep, just on water alone. Yep.
Chuck, that's like a car payment
just
on drinking water for her family. She moved to the town earlier this summer, and this is what she's been dealing with. We should add that the school shut down as well, so her kids were at home. There's been issues with hospitals. I mean, it is a major problem. So as they're working here, I should say that there's other efforts to distribute drinking water inside the city at distribution centers. People were turned away because there wasn't enough water. So there's a lot of work to be done to keep things going in town with people that need the water, and also to get this plant back online.
And Guad, is there any, is there any new construction? Is there any new water treatment facility that's in the works? Are there blueprints waiting to be approved? I mean, I sit there, again, we just went into our archives. We did this story 18 months ago.
Chuck, so let's start from who manages the plant. So the city manages the plant, right? I asked the mayor, why is it that the issues haven't been fixed? He said they've needed more resources for some time, right? So the mayor says, we're glad that now the state is helping us, but originally it's the city that manages the plant. Now the state is here helping out. So when I asked the mayor, I said, well, if you could find the one solution that would work for sure, what would it be? He said, I would not be opposed to a new plant. Then I asked him, well, what would that take? And he said, about $1 billion. So for now, the solution is to work on this plant, which distributes most of the water. And there's another smaller plant that is also being looked at by the experts. So the city government here says they've been trying to make these repairs, but now what we know is with the federal government and the state government involved, there will be a lot more resources to find a solution, Chuck.
Yeah, they passed this big bipartisan infrastructure bill. You would think that water treatment plant for Jackson, Mississippi, there might be a couple dollars in there for them. Unbelievable. And it's nothing more frustrating than when you identify a problem and watch government not tackle it. Guad Venegas on the ground force in Mississippi. Guad, thank you. Before we go to break, I want to give you a quick update on the coronavirus pandemic. Earlier today, the FDA authorized updated versions of the Pfizer and Moderna COVID booster shots. Pfizer's modified vaccine is now authorized for those 12 and up, Moderna's for those that are 18 up. And so what do these new vaccines do, you ask? Well, they're going to target both the original COVID strain and the more highly transmissible BA4 and BA5, so part 4 and 5 of Omicron, not that first round of Omicron that you got, say, last Christmas time. BA5 alone accounts for nearly 90% of all COVID cases in the United States, according to the CDC. This decision now goes to the CDC to issue its own recommendation on how the shots should be used. CDC Director Rochelle Walensky could sign off on those doses as soon as tomorrow, and the vaccinations could begin widely following the Labor Day weekend. After the break, an unprecedented mission. We're live in Ukraine next as the UN inspectors try to restore stability at a Russian-occupied nuclear plant in the middle of a war zone. We'll be right back. Welcome back. UN nuclear inspectors arrived in Zaporizhia, Ukraine today, where they will then make their way to the Russian-occupied nuclear power plant. Concerns around the facility have increased after weeks of shelling, both Russian and Ukrainian forces blaming the other for the instability, but it does look like Russia's trying to use the nuclear facility as some sort of shield. The IAEA Director General, leading the 14-member team, spoke to reporters ahead of their departure from Kyiv, acknowledging the difficulty of carrying out their mission in a war zone and, more importantly, in occupied territory in a war zone. The inspectors will assess any damage to the facility, evaluate whether or not safety systems are still intact. They also intend to speak with the Ukrainian workers operating the plant who are reportedly working under duress and have been subject to intimidation by the Russian occupying forces. But as the UN convoy prepares to head to the power plant, there does seem to be some debate about how long they will stay there, with Russian officials saying the mission will take just one day. The IAEA Director General told our Josh Letterman that the mission needs to take a few days with hopes of establishing a permanent or continual presence. My colleague Megan Fitzgerald is in Kyiv with the latest tonight. So, Megan, I guess the biggest question is, did they get to the plant, and are they going to be there for more than a day?
So, Chuck, what we know right now is that these inspectors are expected to go inside the plant tomorrow. But how long will they stay? That's the big question. As you mentioned, our colleague Josh Letterman spoke with the Director General, who says that this is a several-day mission. They need time to assess this massive nuclear power plant facility there. But according to Russian media, they're saying that this is just an in and out trip. They get in tomorrow and they leave tomorrow night. They're only going to inspect 2 of the 6 reactors. So we don't know exactly what's going to happen. But according to the International Agency, Atomic Energy Agency, they're saying, look, this is a massive plant and there's a lot of work here that needs to be done. They need to inspect the structural integrity of this facility. They want to take a close look at the damage that's been done because, of course, over the last several weeks, we've been reporting on the constant shelling and fighting that has happened in and around the Zaporizhzhia nuclear facility there. And also, as you mentioned, they want to speak to these Ukrainian employees who have been running this facility for the last several months now. But the question here is how candid will these employees be? Will they be under the watchful eye of the Russians? Or will they be able to speak freely and honestly about what's happening inside that plant? The Director General, he says that he's confident that they are going to be able to execute their mission. I want you to listen to a little bit of what he told Josh Letterman earlier today.
We are a team of very experienced people. I'm bringing here the best and the brightest in safeguards, in safety, in security, and we will have a pretty good idea of what's going on.
So the mission here at hand is, of course, to try and avoid a nuclear accident, a national, international catastrophe where we're looking at radioactive material seeping out of this nuclear facility. And the Director General feels confident that they will be able to do that. The question was asked whether or not they felt like the Russians would be able to hide things from them as they go in to do their inspection. And he seems to think that they are knowledgeable enough and they will be able to read through anything that the Russians try and throw at them, Chuck.
Well, as you say, hopefully those Ukrainian nuclear workers feel free to speak. That's something you just don't know until it happens. Megan Fitzgerald on the ground for us in Kyiv. Megan, as always, please stay safe. After the break, an unprecedented mission. We're live. We're going to be what may be an unprecedented mission for our next guest that we're speaking with, Congressman Khanna, a blue congressman trying to make inroads in red America. We're going to talk about his trip and what he's learned. You're watching Meet the Press Now. Welcome back. President Joe Biden is scheduled to give a primetime speech in Philadelphia tomorrow night. He's going to be addressing, quote, what he called the continued fight for the soul of the nation. That sounds familiar because it is. It was essentially the theme of his 2020 campaign. And this comes as Democrats are looking to revamp their messaging leading up to the midterms and beyond in an attempt to win back voters who feel left behind by where the party has moved in the past few years. One of those Democrats who's been doing a lot of this traveling is Congressman Khanna. He represents Silicon Valley, but as you and I were discussing, you sort of took this mission seriously early on. And when you first got here, essentially the old Stephen Colbert, get to know your districts, and you wanted to get to know a lot of districts, and you'd been doing it this way. Tell me about this trip. What makes this trip a little different?
Well, I went to factory towns, and I wanted to hear what people had to say. There was someone, Fred, who came up with a binder, 80 years old, of 40 plants that had closed in the last 40 years. And he said, look, this destroyed our community. It led to divorce. It led to suicide.
This guy, wait a minute. I want to stop here. Yeah. This guy brought you a binder.
A binder.
Where were you? What town?
It was in Anderson, Indiana, in a union hall. Yeah. And 80 years old. And then he mailed it to me. And part of them, people just want to be heard. Sure. I mean, they want to hear what has happened.
That's great analysis. Because what did they went through? Was it just Indiana that he was chronicling, or what?
Just Anderson.
Just Anderson of all the different companies.
All the companies that have moved offshore. And here, and here's the thing. I said, President's talking about making things in America. Someone turned to me and said, I thought that was a Donald Trump thing. I said, no, it was an FDR thing. But part of the challenge has been these communities have a legitimate gripe and grievance. It's that a lot of our production for 40 years has been offshore. And both parties, I mean, yes, it was partly Reagan, but it was both parties are to blame. And it's not just the white working class, it's the black working class, it's the Latino working class. Right. And so how are we going to bring that production back? And that's been part of my efforts.
I was just going to say, so give me your diagnosis. Look, I know these voters well. I've seen some surveys among union members all across the Midwest. They have no trust in the Democrats. And yet these are all former Democratic voters. And they were Democratic voters not that long ago. Most of them probably voted for Obama at least once, if not twice. But they've really, whatever it is, Donald Trump really penetrated the working class Union Democrat. What did you discover about them?
Well, some of them, it's not just that they have lost hope in Democrats. It's worse than that, Chuck. And some of them have lost hope in the American dream, in the country. And the challenge is, how are we going to convince them that the prosperity, the hope for their kids is going to exist? What I've been saying is, let's have the next generation of production here. We can't make masks in America. We can't make antibiotics in America. It's not just semiconductors. Why can't we produce these things? And by the way, we can be honest. It's not that everything from the past is going to come back, but we can have the next generation of manufacturing here. Singapore is doing it, and we can re-industrialize this country. And that, I think, is one of the best things that the Democrats can do to bring the country together.
So it sounds like what you're saying is there were some things Donald Trump said. Let's not talk about his actual policies, but some things that he said that Democrats should have paid attention to.
I don't know if it's what Donald Trump said, but it's certainly what the voters said.
I was just going to say what the voters heard, and they certainly heard that from him, right?
I think what they heard was our jobs have gone offshore, our jobs and production are no longer in the United States. Fine, but look, what were his policies? Corporate tax cuts that led to more offshoring. Right. And he didn't have an inclusive vision. I mean, I go there and I say, yes, we have to rebuild America, but it's going to be white working class. It's going to be immigrants. It's going to be the LGBTQ community. It's going to be everyone. And we're going to create new jobs, new economic prosperity. Let's call it a new economic patriotism. I think if it's just simple, we're going to make things in America. We have a forward-looking vision. I think we can win some people back.
Do you think the crowd you talked to, and I think I think you were doing this tour before the debt cancellation happened on colleges. What would this crowd have said about that, do you think, about debt cancellation? And how could you have convinced them that this was actually good for them?
I think some of them may have been opposed in candor, but what I would have said is, look, there are a lot of first-generation families who are getting their debt canceled. There are a lot of union households whose kids go to community college who are going to benefit from this, or college. And by the way, why don't we also have vocational education covered? If you want to make an automobile today, it's a computer on wheels. You're going to need some technical education. Let's cover that as well. Let's have education for everyone. But I think, look, when I go to these towns, I talk about being pro-choice and I talk about LGBTQ equality. I don't shy away from what I believe. But I say we may disagree on certain issues, but we can all agree that we've got to rebuild America. America needs to lead, and we have a vision for that.
You know, it sounds like that once they were able to hear what your pitch was, and essentially here's what I'm for, they're like, I got no problem with that. But I'm guessing they don't hear this, right? Like, you're probably the first Democrat that's attempted to come to this community in a while. Is this a media consumption thing? Is there something different Democrats can do to talk to these voters so that they hear everything and not just the caricatures?
Well, I think we have to go into some of the red communities, red states. I mean, someone said, why are you going to Anderson, Indiana? We're never going to win that. I said, that's precisely why I'm going. But we also need people from the coast going there. They may see Tim Ryan there. They may see Sherrod Brown there. But here they have this Indian-American guy from Silicon Valley saying, you know, we need to produce things here. We need to make sure that we're working together. And I think it's not just about the jobs. People want this country to come together. They want us to be able to root for America. And that gives them hope.
You know, you have this optimism about you. When you hear at the same time, we're going to have some harsh rhetoric with these midterm elections. MAGA Republicans, semi-fascism. Are you comfortable with some of this rhetoric? And do you think it's the right call?
Well, Truman called Dewey a fascist. This is American politics.
Oh, I have no doubt. Look, the words, I'm not saying they won't be uttered. I guess the question is, should they be?
I tend to be more hopeful, and we're all a product of our experience. I grew up in Bucks County, Pennsylvania. It was a largely white community. There were a lot of people who believed in me. I tend to emphasize the hopeful part of America. That doesn't mean we don't call out things that are wrong. We don't call out people taking documents, classified documents, or interfering with the judicial process. But I think what people want to know is, why is American democracy still the greatest, and what can we do to keep it that way?
All right, you're touring the country, so folks are going to assume, do you want to run for national office? I assume the answer to that is yes, but when?
Well, I want to support President Biden in economic patriotism. He should adopt, and he's free to steal any of my ideas, and I'd like to be out there surrogating for him around the country. But, you know, I wish more people would go around the country from different districts.
my God, if we just had a little more personal interaction, I think everybody would realize the temperature would suddenly drop in this town dramatically. Khanna, Democrat from Silicon Valley, California. Good to see you.
Thank you.
And thank you all for being with us this hour. We'll have more analysis of the fast-changing midterm landscape. It's available right now, audio. Don't miss today's episode of the Chuck Todd Cast. We take you on what would a path to the Democrats actually holding the House look like. I got 2 House experts on, and we go through the country. If you're a real political junkie, this will be your favorite episode. We'll be back tomorrow with more Meet the Press Now. NBC News Now continues with Hallie Jackson right now.
Thanks for watching our YouTube channel. Follow today's top stories and breaking news by downloading the NBC News app.